Hello. I hope you are all well. I'm here today and I am going to speak to you today about on the topic of intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy. Our conversation today is going to be an introductory kind of presentation on the core concepts in intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy. And I will briefly first go through what the theory essentially is all about and what it means, and then I'll try to discuss some of the foundational concepts with you. And then if there are any questions or any other issues that we need to discuss here together, of course I will be covering them as well. So the first question that we got here, or kind of to start from the beginning of it, is that intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy is a form of psychodynamic therapy that was developed in 1960s and in 1970s by Habib Davonloo, and this therapy was developed to be able to make psychoanalytic treatments shorter term and more effective. So the underlying goals were to make therapy more effective and make it kind of more efficient, and to be able to carry it out in shorter amount of time. The theory of ISTDP is largely influenced by attachment theory, Bowlby's attachment theory, and Freud's second theory of anxiety. I'll try to explain both of these two to you. So, and at the core of this theory is that we, as human beings, are ultra social creatures. We need connection, and that is an innate need in human beings to connect with others, and essentially we thrive on the quality of our relationships with other human beings. And that's consistent with attachment theory, that from the moments that we're born, we are in need of care and connection with others, and that goes throughout different stages of our life, different developmental stages of our lives. But that the need for connection and human attachment is a fundamental need in human beings. So ISTDP works under that assumption, and that's the attachment theory. The second theory that has been very influential on ISTDP is Freud's second theory of anxiety, in which we regard human beings in general as feeling creatures. We got underlying emotions in us, and they are stirred up all the time in response to internal or external stimuli. So we get these feelings in us stirred up. However, those feelings or emotions that are not seen as acceptable by us due to our upbringing, our culture, our quality of attachment with others, our experiences, if we find some of those emotions as unacceptable in terms of being detrimental to the quality of our relationships with others, we learn unconsciously really to start feeling anxious in face of those emotions. So emotions that are not deemed to be, or not perceived as acceptable by our caregivers, by our loved ones, tend to stir up anxiety in us. And then we use certain strategies to, whether they're conscious or unconscious, to reduce the anxiety and the associated emotion. So I got certain emotions in me stirred up, it starts to make me feel anxious, and I tend to laugh off my angry emotions to avoid facing them. So the process goes like this, that fundamentally we are feeling creatures, we always have emotions in us. However, those emotions that are not acceptable, specifically by our loved ones in early stages of our development, tend to stir up a sense of anxiety in us, and then we use different strategies to ward off the anxiety and the associated emotions. But what starts to happen is, although we tend to try to get rid of these feelings and the associated emotions, they actually don't go anywhere. They're still in us, they still tend to come up, and that starts to become a source of problem. Because on one hand, the emotions, the feelings are still being stirred up. We don't choose to have feelings. which therefore will stir up anxiety in us, and then we'll need to keep doing the defensive behavior, which might not be in our best interest. For example, if you tend to laugh off your emotions or neglect them or not take them seriously, you might find yourself ending up in relationships where people do not take your feelings seriously. People do not take you seriously. So the process of avoiding our underlying emotions is actually a very costly process. And therefore, a lot of times when people come to see a therapist, they come into the session because they are utilizing, or they're doing certain defenses that they're not necessarily aware of them, and they are very costly in their lives. So the two underlying theories for that help us understand ISTDP theory is theory of attachment, and that is that there is an innate and fundamental need in human beings for connection. And there is Freud's second theory of anxiety, where we are fundamentally feeling creatures. We got the underlying emotions in us. However, the emotions that are not acceptable by our environment tend to stir up anxiety and then use of defenses. And when this happens over time, we are no more aware of these links in ourselves. So these things just happen automatically in us without us knowing. Another important concept in ISTDP is that often when patients walk into a therapist's office, they're walking into the therapist's office because there are problems happening in their lives. They're coming to seek help from us. And you always start doing the work by starting to understand what are the patient's inner psychological problems. So you always make the focus on what are the inner difficulties that you are facing. As we try to understand what are the internal problems, in good case scenarios, patients are able to share with you what problems they're facing. So they can let you know, I'm feeling depressed a lot of times, or I suffer from anxiety, or they have different interpersonal difficulties. Or the patient will have difficulty sharing with you their problems. They either become increasingly vague, they talk about general concepts, or they just become increasingly anxious or overwhelmed, or they might not have a clear idea about it. In that way, if the patient cannot tell you what their problems are because they're getting too anxious or certain defenses are coming up, you don't take that lightly in ISTDP. You actually take that as an important sign, which means now you need to follow the anxiety or follow the defenses or the avoidance or the resistance that the patient is consciously or unconsciously bringing up. Because often that anxiety and that resistance may lead you to where the core underlying issues in that person is. I mean, if you think about it, it's a very fascinating scenario that someone might walk to my office and ask for help with their psychological problems, but when I ask them what are these problems, they cannot tell me, or they start becoming increasingly vague or putting a wall up or say, I don't feel safe sharing these things with you. So these are very important communications, and I think one of the important features of ISTDP is that we pay very close attention to what the patient is telling us, but closer attention to what the patient is not telling us. That is a very important cue. If the patient starts to get increasingly anxious on a given topic, or increasingly putting a wall up, could be many different type of defenses. We are very interested in those defenses because they often could help us and the patient get to the root cause of the problem. So one of the key features of ISTDP is moment by moment assessment of where the patient is in that moment. How anxious are they feeling, whether they're using any defenses, and whether they are emotionally willing to be present and open there with you. Another core issue in ISTDP and the way that we conceptualize problems is that in a good case scenario, we'll have a good attachment experience with our loved ones. Things are going well and we're able to share our emotions. We're able to be authentic, to be ourselves, and to be able to let other people see us in terms of what we experience as ourselves. However, if things go wrong in our lives, if there is a disruption in our attachment experience with our loved ones, In terms of having parents who have very limited emotional capacity themselves, or experiences of trauma or loss of a parent, or extensive hospitalizations in crucial stages of our development, could lead to a major disruption in our attachment experiences. And this disruption is painful. So as infants, as young children, we could experience pain in our loving attachment and relationship with others. And what we know is that the experience of pain often leads to feelings of anger towards the source of the pain. So if I really love my caregivers, which almost all kids do, and now my caregivers are not emotionally available, or they're aggressive, or they're violent, or they're inconsistent, that will leave me with some form of emotional pain, and out of that pain I'll have feelings or experiences of anger towards the same person whom I also love and need. And that would be a very confusing experience for a young child. In fact, the younger the child, the more confusing and difficult to process such emotions. If these things happen at a very young age, for the infants, would be extremely difficult to deal with complex emotions in their attachment experience with their loved ones. And the older that we are, of course, we're more capable of dealing with these things. And so there's a relationship between the severity of patients' symptoms and the age in which they have experienced emotional trauma with their caregivers. But if this happens, and if we experience that pain in our relationships, and therefore anger towards our loved ones, with anger, we have underlying urges and impulses in our body to do actions, to inflict pain on the person who has inflicted pain on us. This is again an evolutionary response. You see it in all mammals. If an animal is injured, you try to not touch them or get close to them, because out of pain they're likely to attack. And it's the same in human beings. So when a child, as infants, there's experience of pain, they will have anger or rage towards the same attachment figure whom they love. And if you have feelings that you would want to harm someone that you love, and your cognitive development hasn't reached the level to be able to differentiate between feeling of wanting to hurt someone and the action of hurting someone, you're likely to develop severe pathological guilt over these urges and emotions. So the conflict between having feelings of love for our loved ones, an experience of pain, and the rage that we experience towards the same subject of love leads to a pathological experience of guilt, and therefore attempts to shut these emotions down, punish oneself out of that guilt, and protect the person that we love. This classically could happen in case of depression, where you could feel really angry at your loved one, a person you care about, a partner, a lover abandons you, you're in pain, you will have feelings of anger towards that person, but you will rationalize or repress and turn the feelings on yourself. I was such an idiot. I should have never loved her. If I was a better person, she would have never left me. So in some ways, in depression, we can see sometimes a clear example how the anger towards the person, towards the other person that we love, and the underlying pathological guilt could lead to us beating up on ourselves, hurting ourselves, and putting a wall up and protecting the other person whom we love. And often then we might develop self-destructive pathological behavior out of that unresolved issue. So when patients walk into therapy, what they start to demonstrate is not these underlying emotions, but they put at the very forefront the behaviors that they have developed to keep these painful emotions out of their conscious awareness. So when they walk in and we want to know them and we want them to share their problems with us, that actually stirs up anxiety and those painful emotions, and they will therefore most likely use the most typical defensive behavior that they have used throughout their lives to not face the painful feelings and to protect other people from their emotions. So in a course of therapy, our work is backwards. we might start working with a person who sits in the session and starts beating up on themselves. Why you're here? Oh, I'm just an idiot. So the patient will start with self-attack, and then it becomes the art of therapy to be able to help the patient become aware of their destructive behavior, and by pointing it out, by clarifying it, and by turning them against them, and then helping them tolerate the anxiety that will rise in them as a result of not using those defenses, and then assisting them to face the underlying emotion that is the cause of that anxiety, and therefore being able to have a more authentic experience of themselves as a human being and in relationship with the therapist, and hopefully with their loved ones out of the therapeutic setting. So in that way, the course of therapy is the reverse of the development of psychopathology in the patients. We start with patients putting their defenses up, their resistance up, the anxiety up, and we have to work our way the other way to get to the underlying feelings of, you know, sometimes it's a lot of emotional pain and hurt and anger and guilt about it, but at the bottom of that is essentially feelings of love and care and need for attachments with others. That is why psychotherapy has been referred to as the act of love, because our message in that work is to let the other patient know that in spite of whatever that is inside them, we care about them, we want to know about their problems, and none of their feelings or what they're experiencing is anyway going to be hurtful to us, and we love and care that patient with all those mixed emotions inside them. So this is ultimately the kind of big goal of therapy. I just want to add that I'm really simplifying this work. This is just an introduction to the theory of ISTDP, and I have tried to make it as simple as possible. Sometimes I feel like it's not really that easy to make it that simple, but I hope this all has made sense to you. Depending on the feedback that I'll get from you, I will choose on to whether to continue on this topic and try to explain it in more practical way and break it down and kind of do it over a number of different presentations, or whether you would be interested in other topics. For those of you who are here right now, and thank you very much for being here, please feel free to send me any questions that you have about such concepts, whether it's about personal issues or whether it's about psychological concepts. Just to clarify, of course, I'm not offering therapy or counseling or anything like that, but my goal on this page is to increase psychological education and improve people's mental health. So you will definitely help me by sending me your questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. I want to thank you all for attending today, and I will see you next week in my weekly lives. Thank you.